All right, you good?
Yep.
All right.
Unless you want to wait for more people to come.
We should wait a little bit longer
Yeah.
because
How's everybody's Friday so far?
oh my goodness, it's been interesting.
It's been a Friday.
It's certainly been a Friday. How's your Friday treating you?
It's going all right. It's going all right. I'm ready for the weekend though.
Certainly.
Mhm.
I'm making you co-host so you can screen share.
Perfect.
We have some people showing up a bit late to this.
Okay.
So we're gonna give them a little bit of time, but let's get started
Yeah.
at like 4:10-ish, maybe.
I think 410 is a good estimate.
We also are probably gonna have some people joining online.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
sir. So, do you want to share a little something about yourself? What you do?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I'm Johnathan Jennings. I'm a software engineer. I've been working on games, basically all sorts of interactive media. I've worked on I call it my Barbie game, like avatar character dress up experiences. I've worked on digital puppet shows. I've worked in virtual reality for several years, and right now I work at a company called Mind Show where we're basically a virtual production studio. So we build software to create animated TV shows. We have like a mocap suit in the studio. And we basically have this kind of custom solution on top of Unity that records video and a bunch of other stuff. That's kind of the gist, I guess, of me and my experience.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So,
Nice.
yeah, as you can tell, in Mega, we have a lot of aspiring engineers. Would you
Mhm.
like to tell anything to them before you begin your talk?
Man, I mean, really, this talk is all about building stuff and the fun of. Oh, oops, my bad. I should not have. The building stuff and kind of the fun and importance of making mistakes when you build stuff. I think, especially as an engineer, I think probably the most true thing I ever heard was if you're a programmer and you're doing your job right, no one notices. And so it's important to mess up and learn how to build stuff the wrong way early, and that way when you get more polished and experience, you'll create more polished and I guess I want to say smooth, that's not the word, but just more seamless experiences as you kind of develop. So I guess if that's what I'd say.
Yeah,
Build stuff, yeah.
that's pretty good experience. Do you
Mhm.
want to share about any like the specific details about the projects you made?
Yeah, right. Oh boy, so many. I think probably my favorite thing I like to tell people about is I got a chance to work on a Ghostbusters VR project for the Google Cardboard several years ago, and they gave me entirely too much creative freedom. So
Yeah.
um I they just kind of said, "Hey, we need a proton gun and go." And I just looked up all the video references I could, the cartoons. I looked up all the game references I could, and I'm really happy with how kind of the proton gun I made came out. But yeah, that's probably my favorite thing that I built, like individual thing I built in a project. Yeah.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. Yeah. So, well, I guess do you want to wait a bit more, or do you think it's a good time to start the presentation?
I'm down to start the presentation. Yeah, and if everybody wants to come in, if they have any questions or anything, I'm more than happy to answer them at the end.
For sure. Don't worry, this is recorded, so they might ask you stuff later. So we might ask you for your contact information at the end of
Okay.
the meeting. All
Okay.
right. So do you
Perfect.
want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen.
All right.
Perfect. And then we're going to go to slideshow. Perfect. All right. Everything look good on your end?
Oh, perfect.
Okay. Let me maybe I'll minimize that. And yeah. Awesome. So Hi, everybody. My name is Johnathan Jennings, and today I want to discuss the power of prototyping with you. I talked to a lot of junior game devs, and one thing I noticed with pretty much all of them is how they undervalue their kind of early exploratory work. Artists tend to kind of wave off how cool their early character designs and sketches are. Designers often downplay the creativeness of like map drawings they make, or simple level blockouts they put together. And definitely for programmers, when they have a really early version of their game to share, they tend to kind of remark how buggy and unfinished it is before people even play it, kind of like, don't judge me too hard. And I understand, because when I learned when I first kind of started programming, that was my same feeling, and I did the exact same thing. But over the years, I've kind of learned that the real work of game development happens in those early exploratory stages, and it's in those moments where you kind of define a game concept and um, um, kind of just find the game concept and its mechanics and features and look and feel that allows you to kind of grow and refine the project later on. And so I guess I kind of really want, I guess my goal at the end of this talk is to make sure that everybody kind of embraces how valuable those early exploratory game concepts you put down are, and whether it's a sketch, a diagram, or a programmer art filled demo for your prototype, it's really kind of the beginning of crafting those digital experiences that will define and be a critical part of your career as you move forward. And so I just want you all to leave this talk excited about sharing your prototypes as you continue to grow in your career. A lot of this talk is going to be primarily centered on me sharing a few kind of early experiments, mock-ups, and diagrams that informed a more complete game idea, and then how those steps were valuable in delivering the finished product for a game. And it's always important to remember that your favorite games started out as bad art, simple level blockouts, and buggy code too. And so before we begin, does anyone want to guess what this prototype, like what game this prototype comes from?
You guys want to shoot?
Any guesses?
Personally, for me, I think it kind of looks like Colossus. For
For
like,
sure.
Maybe a Jurassic Park game of some kind?
All right. Good guesses. Absolutely. Any others, or? Okay. So actually, that was an early prototype of Horizon
oh,
Zero Dawn. And so you'll actually notice,
Wow.
like, if you can see the destructible areas on the, I think it's called the Thunder Job, but these are all kind of different components and highlight basically the breakability of different components of the character, and kind of prototyping that aspect of Horizon Zero Dawn. And so um, I recommend that if you haven't watched it, the No Clip documentary on kind of the making of Horizon Zero Dawn, super fascinating. They talk about the very long kind of exploratory process that happened with that game before they kind of figured out really what it was. And so I think it's just a fun thing to watch in general. If you're ever bored and just want to kind of want an interesting game documentary to look up, definitely No Clip Horizon Zero Dawn on YouTube is a great option. And so before we get into oops ah before we get into kind of why I think prototyping is some of the most valuable work you can do early in your career, and it's something you should stick with. I think it's only right to share a little bit about me and my work experience. So I'll share a video reel of my portfolio covering some of my past 11 years of work, and then I'll describe my career in a little more detail, and then we'll actually dive into kind of the core of the talk.
All right.
Is their audio supposed to be shared?
Oh yeah. Oh, is
We're
it
not-
not coming through?
No.
Nope.
That's unfortunate.
I think it's because it's an embedded video.
Okay.
You want to try
Okay.
like outside link?
I can see, I can try. I also know there's like a Zoom setting for sharing the audio.
There should be. When you
Okay.
share it, there should be an option that says share with audio.
Okay. Let me see. Stop video. Let's see. Okay, so I'll stop. Oh man, I think I'm lost. Okay, stop. Okay, so I'll stop sharing the Zoom video, and then it's okay if I restart it with.
Yeah.
Okay. Share screen, and then. I'm actually not seeing where to share the audio.
When you click share and you should select screen, it should pop up like on the bottom left next to optimize video.
Okay, so share screen. Share sound. Okay, there we go. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Permissions issues fun. Okay. And so cool. Can you hear the audio now?
Okay.
Okay.
So no. So maybe try outputting to embedded video. Like
Okay.
on YouTube.
Okay, so play on YouTube. Okay, I can do that. Let's see.
Oh, that's weird. We still
Okay.
can't hear it.
Oh, how weird. Okay. Okay. It's more like a background track. So it's that's unfortunate, but yeah, I don't know why that's so weird.
You want to talk over while it's happening?
Yeah, sure. Actually, so we will move those. Yeah, and so really kind of this reel is kind of like I mentioned, it's a kind of a compilation of my basically my portfolio of work of over several years. This is specifically kind of my Barbie game, so to speak, right? Some mobile games I worked in. I began my career in mobile. Animal Planet was my first kind of published professional release game. This is Ghostbusters VR, and that was the proton gun that I built. This was some prototypes I made with the Magic Leap at one point. Definitely one of my favorite platforms to develop things for. This is actually one of the games I'll be discussing today, Supersonic Rhyme Chamber, which was like a hip hop VR rhythm game that we developed. And then this is actually my latest project, Galactic Bar Fight. It's an indie game I released on the Oculus Quest. I released a prototype about 2 years ago, got a lot of interest, about like 9,000 downloads when I uploaded it to App Lab. And then altogether, it's gotten 15,000 downloads since the initial release. So definitely a project I'm super proud of. And I share all that just to kind of just demo all my projects, but ultimately I worked in games and game adjacent tech industry for over 11 years total as a senior software engineer and technical designer. I currently work at the virtual production studio called Mindshow. I worked on over 22 release projects and counting across games and enterprise. So that includes apps as well. Release projects on Steam, the Magic Leap, the Oculus Quest, Windows Store, Windows Phone, Amazon Kindle, iOS, and Android. I also have been an individual contributor for pretty much every project I've been on, and I've done UI engineering, gameplay programming. I ported games from primarily Android to iOS, but also from PC ports to like HTML browser ports. I've done multiplayer backend programming stuff. I've done a lot of rapid prototyping, analytics system kind of building and system design and management for that. I've been created a lot of third-party tools and more. And then for a while, I was on a podcast called Zero to Play, where I'd interview other game developers. Probably the most popular podcast I worked on was with the creator of Choo Choo Charles, which I'm not, if you haven't played it, it's the Spider Train game. And I think it came out and it was pretty well received. And so it was a really fun interview. And then I'm also a industry mentor and career coach for a Unity engineer bootcamp called Game Dev HQ. In short, I just love I love games. I love building them. I love discussing them. I love teaching people how to pursue career and creating them. And so, of course, thank you all for joining me for today's talk. And so, really to start with, like, right, what is a prototype, right? What is it? The Oxford Dictionary defines a prototype as a first typical and preliminary model of something, especially a machine from which other forms are developed or copied. And really, to simplify that definition even further, I'd say a prototype is a foundation for a project. It embodies the essence of an experience enough to allow the team to make decisions and adjustments to refine and expand on an experience. And so I was looking around just for more videos of like various AAA game prototypes. And one I found that I thought was really cool was the God of War Baldur fight prototype. And so I'll play a little bit of that now. I do wish there was audio because I think that helps. But I'll just show kind of some of the prototype gameplay from that initial fight in God of War of 2018. And so really in that prototype video, you can kind of see how a few core mechanics are established early on the ability to swing and recall the axe, the ability for Baldur to grapple and rush Kratos through destructible trees, the quick time event power struggles, and all of those mechanics can be seen to be further polished and refined in the final release that it kind of seamlessly transitions to. But really the core gameplay and emotional tension of that sequence can be felt early on in the prototype. And really, I think that's a really great way to kind of show an example of like defining those core gameplay elements, far before, it has the polish of the particle effects, the added slow motion, the additional sound effects. You couldn't hear it, but the prototype itself was silent, so there wasn't any voiceover, which if you've played that fight, like there's a constant talking between Kratos and Baldur. I think it was just a really solid video to kind of demonstrate establishing core mechanics before getting to that finished vision of the product. And so, let's not do it again. Okay, there you go. And so there's some benefits that I found for when you're prototyping, right? And some of the benefits that I found from prototyping games in my own experience are that the prototyping phase is the most fun and least stressful part of game development for me. Usually it happens in the early phase. It's an exploratory phase. Ideas tend not to stick. So, you try a thing today, it doesn't work. You try something new tomorrow. A proof of concept can change dramatically in just a few days. And I've seen that happen time and time again. And then I think it's a time in a project where all the ideas are welcome. I think everybody kind of has more of an equal say in the prototype phase versus later on in development, where you kind of really had to let the designers own and tighten the experience according to how they envision how everything should work. And it's also a great way to learn and explore different genres of gameplay and kind of find what aspects of a game genre and its creation you enjoy in particular. The two examples at the bottom are tests I did for various prototypes. I grew up playing Star Fox, and I love Panzer Dragoon Orta. And so this was kind of like my attempt to work on like an on-rails game experience. And then this was kind of like a monster collection game prototype I made to kind of explore what it'd be like to make a Pokemon or Digimon type just monster catching game. And so it was a really fun way for me just to kind of poke around and see what kind of games I could build, and if I had the understanding of like the core mechanics to deliver a game of that type. It's also a great way to participate as a member of a team, whether you're a programmer, a designer, artist, or even a composer. I think it can be really hard to understand early in your career how each development department has a different set of values and stakes. In the studio, oftentimes there's a problem between the artist wants the game to look as good as possible. The programmer wants a game to run as quickly as possible. What's a happy medium between the game runs really well and it looks really pretty? And so working with other people on prototypes is a great way to kind of learn how to do that collaborative dance and kind of participate in delivering a game that satisfies the stakes for everybody on the team. It's also a great way to learn new technologies and expand your skill set. I prototyped on the Oculus Quest early in its development to make my game Galactic Bar Fight, and that led me to countless opportunities from, being I was on an LA Comic-Con panel to talk about working on VR projects, to I was invited on VR podcasts just to talk about my game because I was one of the early adopters to the technology. It's also a great way to build experience and create work to add to your portfolio, which I'm sure you all know is super important to get any job in the industry. You're also going to start to notice certain habits and approaches that feel more comfortable to you when you're developing games, and that's going to lead you to starting to build your own unique workflow to understand and best approach your own like kind of creative outlet when developing a game. And then you also get a chance to step out of your comfort zone. If there's another role in game development you'd like to explore, I think the prototype phase is a good time to try that. It's very similar to working on a game jam. I think a lot of people join game jams to try something that they've never done before. But I've been composer, art director, and creative director for most of my prototypes. And while I wouldn't pay myself to do any of that work, I do enjoy embracing the challenge and learning that comes with wearing those other hats. And then lastly, when you do join a project and team early in its game development process, the goal is always to figure out how to build an MVP or a minimum viable product. And usually you do that to pursue further funding for a project to get your game off the ground. And so really learning how to prototype is a great way to learn how to build a project with the goal of pursuing investors and, bringing your creative product to life in a way that's going to be, both financially and creatively rewarding. And so to start with, the first kind of case study I'm going to share is of a few games. And so I'm going to show, we're going to walk through a few different case studies and how each prototype kind of evolves from a diagram into like a final product. And so this is currently Thunderjack's Log Runner. It's one of probably the games I hold dearest to my heart. It was a game I worked on in 2014, and it was the first project I worked on from the initial concept to the publishing phase. At the time, we were a new internal game team for a large studio called Fuel Games, and our goal was to create a game that the bosses, the executives would sign off on for the full production for. And so while exploring the App Store to figure out what kind of games were popular, our producer at the time presented us with the idea of creating a game that prioritized screen taps and twitchy arcade gameplay. And so his initial idea, his initial concept description was that we should make a game where you are a guy on a barrel and the goal is to bounce on top of the barrel as he floats down the river. That's the whole prompt we had for the game idea. So not a lot to work with. But with that said, when he described this concept, I could mentally visualize the experience. And 2 days after he introduced the concept, I presented him with this diagram and how I thought theoretically the game could work. And so this is probably my favorite kind of diagram to show, just because it really was the origins of Thunderjack's Log Runner. And there's a couple of key things on this diagram that I drew to kind of define what the experience is going to be. And so first and foremost, there was a guy on a barrel, center of the screen. And so part of the value in drawing this diagram was figuring out how to frame that on a theoretical screen. He mentioned that he wanted to be able to balance the character. And to me, when he said that, that communicated a lost state of you're not balanced enough, you're going to fall over and lose. And so with that, I kind of mentally came up with a set of constraints. The negative 15 and 15 were ranges. I kind of based that off of the idea of like your character balancing at a 45-degree angle. And so as you would kind of sway from left to right, there was a balance number, and I would multiply that balance number. I would either add to that balance number or subtract that balance number depending on which side of the barrel you're leaning. And that would indicate kind of like a false sense of gravity. And then I would multiply that by 15 to get kind of the angle you would lean at. And if you went over 15, you'd fall off. If you were less than negative 15, you'd fall off. I also, and that's kind of what this rotation arc represents. And then last but not least, is kind of like the screen taps. Basically every time you would tap the screen, I would either subtract 1, so that if you're leaning on the plus, if you're getting to plus 15, you tap, of course, the left side of the screen to reduce your balance number, which 0 would be the perfect balance. And then same thing here, if you're leaning far to the left, let's say negative 13, if you tap here, we'd add +1, and that would increase your rotation to the right. And so really this kind of embodies the core functionality for the experience. And this diagram helped us envision what the core gameplay experience would look like early on, but we would need a playable prototype to really establish how the game should feel. Like all this looks good, I guess, but it wasn't until we actually made it playable and developed our first playable prototype that we got to really see how it worked. And so the next step was figuring out, does our core gameplay feel good? Things that our visualization really couldn't show us. I took the whole of next week to put together a very rough prototype of the functioning game concept. And in that process of creating and testing, we learned a lot of lessons about the finer details for executing a game like this. This kind of artistic rendition is basically visually how the prototype looked. And we'd use this visuals kind of for our design docs as the game kind of continued to mature. We really, the things this playable prototype taught us was, first of all, just balancing by itself was boring. And that's probably pretty obvious, right? But I think it was really interesting to kind of see that no matter how aggressive we made the gravity, like the act of just tapping to keep a person centered wasn't enough to really keep people engaged. We also learned less is more when it came to our screen real estate. For the initial diagram, I kind of imagined the game in like a horizontal landscape mode, but we learned really quickly that when you make it portrait like this, it kind of both reduces the screen size and it forces players' attention on the center to the character rotating around the barrel. And then for this prototype, I had one of the first tests I did, because we wanted to differentiate between tapping to balance versus tapping to jump. We had a 2-finger screen tap, and that felt really clumsy. Like depending on how I guess in sync your fingers were, you might accidentally rebalance instead of jumping. Sometimes you jump on accident when you wanted to balance. And so we learned that didn't work. And from that point, but there were some things that this prototype also helped us introduce. And one was that we added this randomized wind force to the character at varying intervals, and that helped us produce more variance in our balancing. The less kind of just automatic gravity that was applied to the character, the better. When we saw a gust of wind would pop up and blow a character to the left or right, whether to save a character or to like force the player in a really compromising position, it made them way more interested in the balancing mechanic. We also added enemy fish, as shown here, that could immediately force our player into a lost state when they collide with the player. And that commanded their attention even more because it added an element of timing to the gameplay. The fish would kind of hang out and then do a little tilt, like a little shake, and then we'd have the player basically time jumping over the fish. And so that further made it a more interesting and gripping mechanic. And then lastly, we allowed this prototype allowed us to see that we could use time as a scoring metric to measure player success. And that was really came down to like the longer you were on the barrel and the longer you maintain balance, the better you're doing. And so those were like kind of our core design, I would say cornerstones for the rest of the game and how we would build the game moving forward. And so that brings us to Thunderjack's Log Runner, the final version. And so the final product of Thunderjack's Log Runner was developed by our team of 7. We made it over a year and a half. We use kind of those initial prototypes and visualizations to really define the core aspects that we would later expand upon the game, expand within the game. So some things I'll point out that we continue to build on for those core systems beyond the prototype were using tap for more things, like there's reward birds that show up, you tap them to drop gifts, and then you have to balance to grab those gifts while they're falling. You also have to balance to grab coins and also jump to grab certain coins of different denominations. There's a challenge system that lists challenges such as surviving for a certain distance or amount of time, which was an extension of our realizing we could use balancing time as a way to track mastery. We could also measure the cumulative balance time to display the player's progress on like a world map. So basically, if you survived for 50 meters and altogether you've survived for 200 meters, we'd add that 50 meters and we'd see your character slowly move up a map. And on that map, you'd also see how far your friends kind of moved up the map as well. The fish enemies, eventually we evolved them to be more forgiving and not be an immediate loss if they touched you, but they but they'd be able to kind of apply force to knock you back and forth. They'd also be able to stun you and make it so that you couldn't rebalance your character. And then we had interactive zones, which rewarded coins when the players would balance at certain specific angles for sustained periods of time. And so I say all that just because there are different things to look at. It's not a long trailer, so but our game became a lot more complex even beyond those prototypes and diagrams. Yeah. And so that was Thunderjack. And so really I say all this because if I had to boil down the evolution to Thunderjack in 3 steps, and there were definitely way more than 3 steps, the 3 different phases would be phase 1, which was the visualization and core mechanic conception of the game, figuring out what our game even was as far as inputs and framing it on the screen and win-loss conditions, as well as mapping out what the game experience would look like. Phase 2 was the realization stage and kind of getting a rough version of the game in our hands to understand what was and wasn't working. This phase was great in that it helped us understand how to expand and further explore additional mechanics to our core design and find ways to really create a satisfying gameplay hook. And then phase 3, we took the same core foundational mechanics we initially explored in the playable prototype, and we used them to expand upon and add additional layers of complexity to our gameplay loop. And so with Thunderjack, I really want to highlight what it means when you use your prototypes to find your game experience early. But in my next example, I'm going to share with you a journey I had with using prototypes to even develop what the definition of what our game was. And so this was Supersonic Rhyme Chamber. It was shown at Game Devs of Color last year, and as a VR rhythm hip hop game I worked on in the Oculus Launchpad program 2 years ago. And so the concept of Supersonic Rhyme Chamber was that it was going to have the hip hop focus and the art style of Parappa the Rapper, the interactive mechanics of a game like Beat Saber or Guitar Hero. And then we were focused on the act of rapping as an MC, utilizing a microphone like in the SingStar karaoke games. And so that's a lot. Like that is kind of a really messy combination of mechanics to explore. It was really ambitious. We had a small team, but we loved the concept so much that we explored several experiments to kind of figure out exactly what it would look like to make a game like this. And so I'm going to run you through some of our prototypes that we made for Supersonic Rhyme Chamber. And so in the very first version of Supersonic Rhyme Chamber, and again, I do wish the audio was working, but in the very first prototype, what we were envisioning was almost like a exaggerated rap simulation, exaggerated hip hop concert simulation. And so for our very first prototype, and we basically had IBM Watson as our speech to text system. And so I wrote kind of like a keyword parsing system that when players would say certain keywords such as lion, a lion sound effect would play. Or if you counted out numbers, that particle effects would pop up that show the numbers. I say boom and bam at one point in this kind of demo, and you can see the particle effects show up in the background. And really the goal was to try to figure out how to make the act of rapping fun and really use virtual reality to enhance the concept of speaking things into existence. And so this prototype did teach us some cool things, and there were some cool things about making this very first prototype. The first thing was working with IBM Watson was really fun, and the notion of saying a word and seeing our project react to the spoken word was a really neat input mechanism. It was also really fun to explore putting a player at the center stage of like an arena. The bad thing is we learned really quickly, people feel uncomfortable rapping if they don't already rap for fun in their personal life. Probably obvious, but at the time we were hoping it would make people more interested in, playing the act of rapping in the same way I guess people gravitated towards Guitar Hero because of their experience playing the virtual guitar. And then the other bad thing we really noticed was there was a noticeable delay of about 2 to 3 seconds between speaking a word and the way our text parsing system activated the correct keyword prefabs. And I guess I can't really exaggerate or express it enough that 2 to 3 seconds when you're trying to rap feels like a lot more than 2 to 3 seconds, or it feels like you finished talking and then it's just getting to parsing your second word. And so that was really where Supersonic Rhyme Chamber started, but that did lead to our second demo. And so our second demo, we kind of explored playing with the dynamics of a crowd. What would it feel like to put our player in a situation where they were in front of a large reactive crowd? We were still playing with IBM Watson at this point, but we wanted to do a deeper exploration into like the aspect of having characters that kind of were active and bouncing along with your music and your voice. And so the cool thing about making this prototype was that it was really cool to develop that sense of scale and to feel the bouncing animated crowd. I think there were like 700 agents or so I put in the editor for this test. And you definitely got the sense that you were the star in front of the masses. That's something I'm really proud of that we accomplished. We started to see the value of really a bright color palette. I think we weren't really sure how our game would look, but we were going for a parappa styled visual aesthetic. And we learned really leaning into colors was valuable through this prototype. And then we kind of, music-wise, we realized that lo-fi hip-hop was a great kind of lower tempo and more relaxed way to explore the rhythm game kind of genre. The bad that came with this prototype was that it was really hard to set up a viewpoint that allowed the player to both read the words to their verses and not simultaneously be distracted with the crowds. As you can kind of see with this floating text, we couldn't really figure out the best place to put it. On the previous screen, I had kind of the words on the projectors, but that didn't really work if we wanted to maintain the focal point of the center of the crowd. And so we lost that. We had 2 competing areas we wanted you to look, and so that didn't work well. We didn't have the budget to create a visually complex and interesting and unique crowd. This is mainly asset store visuals. And so while this was good for our test, I think for a fuller product, it would have been a little bit harder for us to make sure that the crowd seemed and looked as diverse as we would have wanted it to. And then one thing we learned was trying to have Watson parse whatever you're saying over a loud music beat. That was also coming out of the speakers. It felt like trying to talk in a really loud club. And so if you're going to GDC soon, I definitely recommend any important people you want to meet, don't talk to them in the club because you'll have the same experience we did trying to compete to be heard. And so this prototype also taught us quite a few things, and it gave way to our next prototype, which kind of became I titled it Fighting Words, but it was really our third exploration of kind of a more reliable input mechanic, and also a way to make the dynamics of a rap battle feel like an actual kind of combat experience. I think really when we kind of thought about translating a rap battle to a Pokemon battle in VR. And so kind of what we're doing here in this prototype is that the guy you're competing against, he's rapping his verses, and basically every time you block a verse, the text turns green to kind of show that you blocked it, and if you miss a word, then it turns red to kind of show how well you're blocking against him. And so again, really cool concept. We learned rhythm boxing was a fun kind of input mechanism. It's fun to punch the air, especially when you're like fake shadow boxing a character. We also really learned that animated environment exploration, so the animated environment exploration helped us realize it could be fun to experience a world that comes to life when the music is played. This was our first art test of like a Parappa style character in VR, and it turned out really well. I think we really liked how this character looked and figuring out the scale and the way he animated. And we began to really conceptualize that rap battles would be the core of our gameplay experience. But we had a really hard challenge of figuring out how to score and communicate how well players doing, and how to deliver that same sense of nailing a song the way Parappa the Rapper does with its cool rating, or Guitar Hero conveys using star power. It was just really hard to, beyond like the red and green text, it was really hard to find a way to make the player feel like they were being rewarded for mastering blocking and competing in this rap battle. And then we never really figured out what it looked like to punch a response back at your opponent. That was also really hard for us to visualize. And we also had a lot of questions. What I didn't add was we had a lot of questions about syncing the speed at which these lyrics are coming at the player with an actual hip hop beat, right? Like this is all kind of based on timers. It's not actually connected to like a song per se.
Jennings, as a heads up, our meeting's supposed to end at 4:50, so if you could wrap things up, that'd be excellent. You have a great talk though, but like
sure, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, for sure. Yeah. And so what okay. So I think, oh boy. So I'll speed past, and what kind of the core of what I want to share with you guys is just how working on your prototypes and your experiments can inform your future projects, and really the value of being able to visualize and realize a project early on and turn that into a full project is something that's going to be really valuable in the industry. When you get into a studio and they ask you to create a rough prototype or MVP of a product, or you have a pitching contest internally, which lots of studios do, it's really valuable to be able to kind of visualize the core of an experience, be able to make sure in that visualization or diagram, you kind of get the core gameplay tenets you want to follow. Make sure that when you create your playable prototype, you see how those core tenets hold up, and then add a layer of complexity on top of them. And then after that, that's going to allow the studio and your team to further expand the prototype and experience in general. And so this is kind of this is just an example of me working on a prototype in 2018. I would and I abandoned the prototype. I re-embraced the prototype in VR to make a really rough version of an updated weapon system. And then this is how the finalized version of that shooting mechanic worked in my full Galactic Bar Fight release. And so My parting thoughts, right? Creating diagrams is a great way to help you visualize the game and its core mechanics long before you put technical work into realizing its features. Prototypes are a great way to understand what feels good to players early and help you define your hook. A good prototype will help you form the foundation of a larger and more polished game experience. Sometimes prototypes help you discover what your game actually is when you may not know yourself. In addition, developing a prototype is a great way to refine your development skill set and explore new genres and styles of gameplay. Creating a great prototype is a great way to learn how to work in a team with members with a variety of skills. And most of the time, any experience is positive. So this is all really great for boosting your portfolio. You're going to start to notice similar, if not the same, design patterns and kind of develop your own creative workflow as you develop more prototypes. And it's a great great chance to step out of your traditional roles. And then lastly, just remember that defining a minimum viable product is just paid prototyping. And so really that's the gist of my talk. So thank you all very much.
Hey, everyone, give a round of applause to Mr. Jennings here for his wonderful presentation about prototyping. We don't have much time left, but does anybody want to ask some questions? Shoot.
I had one big question throughout this, which was in my experience with, well, I think I got as far as prototyping. And I had an issue with like the game sucked. Like I played it and it sucked, and I didn't know what it was. Like I noticed that you listed like this is good, this is bad.
Right.
I didn't know what was bad, and it wasn't good. So what would be your advice for like that scenario?
Right. I think so. Did you have anybody else play it?
I did, and their advice was like just keep adding stuff to it and so I wasn't sure if that was like the right way to go.
Right. And one of the things I found is like when you're having somebody test your game, the best thing I would say to do is if playing your game, then they'll ever be able to tell you. Like, for example, if somebody gets stuck, when somebody's playing your game, they're going to be really nice to you, right? Out of kindness, right? But if they if they don't know where to go, they usually don't know that they don't know where to go. And if they're really immersed in trying to enjoy your game and experience it, they're not going to know how to communicate to you. Like they're going to be so in the act of playing, they're not going to be able to communicate that they just got lost in the level, essentially. And so I guess what I would say is I would watch people play the game and I would look and see where they're spending the most time, where they're wasting a lot of time, where do they seem to get frustrated, where does it like, I always look for a smile. So whenever if they like an unintentional smile to me lets me know that we're on the right track. And so I guess I would definitely you ask them what's going on, but I would do a lot of watching and seeing where the problems with your game might be happening. And yeah, I know it's kind of hard because it's kind of a general question and general piece of advice, but I would just watch people play your game and make sure that they're responding to your game the way you would hope that a player would respond to your game.
That helps. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We really appreciated having you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. Great to see you, man.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice to meet you. Talk to you later. Bye.
And if they want to reach out to you, how can they?
Oh, absolutely. My email is jjennings0309@gmail.com. So feel free. Yeah, that's probably the best way. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Definitely send me a connection request. But yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.